File rights aren't permitted. Let me count with a Hiredoc which handles the quotes literally. The Hiredoc is too large for the parser. Let me count in chunks. Total. 1497 plus 810 plus 967 plus 1800 equals 5074 words inside the 805 window. Let me confirm the hook is still exactly 150, verified by actual word count, not estimate. Total 5074 words, inside 805 hook exactly 150 words. Hook and ending are preserved verbatim, the false calm, Eleanor slept, the trigger, the fist on the door, the CTA after the deed reveal, and every plot beat remain intact. No ellipses. Here is the tightened script. A door slammed shut and the bolt slid home from the inside. A woman stood on the porch with snow blowing sideways into her face. She raised one fist and knocked again. Nothing. Her knuckles were bare, red, shaking. At her feet, a dog pressed against her leg, thin and gray around the muzzle. She pulled her coat tighter and picked up a single suitcase, the handle taped. Then she turned and walked down the steps into the dark because there was nowhere else in town to go. Her name was Eleanor Pruitt, 70 years old, a widow, and the last boarding house in Cedar Hollow had just refused her a bed for the night. At the edge of town sat a building nobody had opened in 40 years. What Eleanor found behind those boarded windows would tear this town's oldest secret wide open. Stay with me on this one. The woman who had shut the door in her face was named Delia Vole. Eleanor didn't know that yet. All she knew was she'd stood on that porch, counted out cash from a coin purse, and watched a stranger's eyes go cold the moment she said her name. Pruitt, Eleanor had said, just for a few nights. The woman had looked at her the way you look at a stain. Then she'd said the beds were full, though the sign in the window still read rooms available, and shut the door. Now here's the thing about Eleanor. She was not a woman who begged. She'd buried a husband 3 months back, a quiet man named Harold who fixed watches and left her nothing but debt and a dog. When the bank took the house in Billings, she did the math the way she always did, careful and cold, and it said go back to where she started, Cedar Hollow. The town she'd been born in and hauled out of at 8 years old, so long ago she barely trusted the memory. She thought someone might remember her people. She thought a small town might be kinder than a city. She thought wrong. Barlow walked beside her without complaint. That was the dog, a shepherd mix gone gray, 13 years old with a bad hip and eyes that watched her like she was the only warm thing left. He'd been Harold's dog first. Now he was hers and she was his, and neither of them had anywhere to sleep. The snow came harder. Eleanor's feet had stopped feeling like feet somewhere back on Main Street. She passed the shut-up diner, the dark church, the hardware store where a man had watched her through the glass and looked away. Every window in Cedar Hollow seemed to know her name and hate it, and she couldn't figure out why. She kept walking because stopping meant freezing. That's not a figure of speech. That's what happens to old bodies in Montana in December. The road ran out at the north end of town. Past the last streetlight, past a leaning fence, the land opened into scrub and dark, and there, set back from the road, sat a building. Long and low, stone at the base and gray timber above, a porch running the whole front. Boards were nailed over every window in a big careless X. The door was chained. Above it, worn nearly smooth by 40 winters, hung a wooden sign. Eleanor stopped. Barlow stopped with her. She could only read the last word, carved deep enough that the snow caught in the grooves. Post. A trading post. Sealed up and forgotten at the edge of a town that didn't want her. She stood there and felt the cold reach all the way into her chest, and she made a decision that would change the rest of her life, though she didn't know that yet. She only knew Barlow was shivering, and she was not going to let him die in a ditch because a town full of strangers had turned its back. "Come on, old man," she said. "We're getting you inside." The chain was rusted through. Eleanor was 70, but she'd spent a life doing hard things. She found a length of pipe by the fence, worked it into a link, and leaned her whole weight on it. Her breath came in clouds. Her shoulder screamed. Then the link gave with a crack like a gunshot, and the chain slithered down into the snow. The door was swollen in its frame. She put her shoulder to it, once, twice. On the third try it groaned inward, and a breath of dead, dry air rolled out over her, and Barlow's ears went straight up. Whatever was in there, he heard it first. Eleanor stepped inside out of the wind and pushed the door shut behind her. For a long moment she just stood in the dark, listening to her own heart, wondering what in God's name she had broken into. She found a lamp because the place was full of them. That was the first strange thing. She'd expected an empty shell, picked clean by 40 years of thieves and animals. Instead, her hands closed on a shelf of kerosene lamps, dusty but whole, lined up like soldiers. She found matches in a tin by the counter, dry as bone, and on the fourth strike one caught. The light bloomed and Eleanor Pruitt stopped breathing. The trading post had not been picked clean, it had been left. Left the way you leave a room when you mean to come right back. Shelves ran the length of both walls and they were full. Canned goods furred with dust. Bolts of cloth. Rope, nails, tobacco, a wall of glass jars gone cloudy. A cash register sat on the counter, its keys yellowed. A wood stove squatted in the middle of the floor with a full box of split wood beside it, as though someone had stacked it that morning. Nobody had touched any of it. In 40 years, nobody in Cedar Hollow had walked 20 minutes to the edge of their own town and taken so much as a single can of beans. Eleanor had lived long enough to know what that meant. People don't leave good things sitting free for 40 years because they're honest. They leave them because they're afraid. "What are you?" she said to the room. Her voice came out cracked. Barlow didn't answer. He was already working, nose down, moving along the base of the counter with his tail low and his whole body tense. Eleanor got the wood stove going. She wasn't proud of taking the wood, but pride wasn't going to keep an old dog alive, and she promised the empty building she'd pay it back somehow. The fire caught, and the room began slowly to warm. She peeled off her wet coat, found a stool, and let herself feel how tired she was. That was when Barlow started scratching. He'd stopped at a spot near the end of the counter, digging at the floorboards, claws going hard, a low whine building in his throat. Eleanor knew that whine. It wasn't fear. It was the Herald is home whine, the one he made when something meant something. "Barlow, leave it." He didn't. He scratched harder. Eleanor got down on her knees, which at 70 is its own small act of courage, and brought the lamp low. The boards there were worn pale, smoother than the rest, the way wood gets under a person's feet over years. And into one board, deep and deliberate, someone had carved a name. She brushed the dust away with her thumb, and the world tilted. The name in the wood was Silas Mercer. Eleanor sat back hard on the cold floor. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 62 years. She had almost let herself forget it on purpose, the way you forget a song that hurts. Silas Mercer was her father, the man who had carried her out of Cedar Hollow on his shoulders at 8 years old, in the dark, in a hurry, and never told her why. The man who died in a rented room in Spokane when she was 20, and left her nothing but his careful way with numbers and a silence about his past so complete she'd stopped asking. Her father had carved his name into the floor of this building. Her father had owned this place. Eleanor Pruitt had walked the length of a town that hated her, been turned out into the snow, and stumbled by pure chance into the one door in Cedar Hollow that had been hers by blood all along. Except it wasn't chance. She understood that later. But sitting on that floor with her father's name under her hand, all she felt was the ground of her whole life shifting and a question rising up out of the dark that she could not put down. Why had they run? She didn't sleep. You don't after a thing like that. She kept the fire fed and went through the trading post inch by inch with the lamp, Barlow close as a shadow. The rolled papers were receipts, hundreds of them in a small, tidy hand she knew in her own bones, because it was the hand she wrote in herself. Under the counter she found the ledgers, a whole shelf of them, thick and leather-bound. The pages were columns, names down the left, dates and figures across. Alina read them by lamplight and the names stopped her cold because she'd been hearing them all day. Vole, Garrett Vole, a long list of purchases on credit. Delia Vole's grandfather, most likely. Ambrose Sutter, the hardware man's family. Whitfield, Cray. Half the names on the shop signs of Cedar Hollow were written in her father's ledger, and after each one in that same careful hand was the same word over and over. Ode, ode, ode. Alina turned the pages with hands that wouldn't stay steady. Her father hadn't just run a store, he'd carried the whole town. In hard years he'd sold on credit to families that couldn't pay, and he'd written it all down. Every dollar and the total at the back, when she found it, made her sit down again. The people of Cedar Hollow had owed Silas Mercer a fortune. And then Silas Mercer had vanished in the night, and the debts had vanished with him, and the store had been chained shut and left to rot rather than opened and read. Now you tell me, does that sound like a town that forgot? Or a town that wanted very badly to be forgotten? At the back was a door, not boarded, not chained from outside, locked. A heavy iron lock, the kind you'd need a real key for. Alina put her hand flat against the wood and felt, for no reason she could name, that the answer she wanted was on the other side of it. She looked for the key for an hour. Barlow found it in 10 minutes. He'd gone back to the carved board with her father's name and scratched at the edge of it until Alina came and pried it up with the pipe. Underneath, in the gap between the floor joists, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, was a key and a folded packet of papers. The key turned the lock on the third try. The back room door swung open, and the smell that came out was not rot. It was paper and metal and old cedar. She raised the lamp. The back room was small and dry and lined with strongboxes. Not one, 6 of them ironed, stacked and shut. And on the wall, framed under cracked glass, hung a paper with a state seal, and Alina didn't need to read every word to know what it was. A deed. To the land and the building, and the name on it, clear as the day it was written, was Silas Mercer. Her father had owned it free and clear. Not a lease, not a debt. Owned. Alina stood in that little room with the lamp trembling in her hand and something in her, something that had been braced and cold and careful for 70 years, finally let go a little. She had walked in out of the storm with a suitcase and a dog and $40, and she was standing in the middle of her own inheritance. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out wet and broken, and she pressed her hand over her mouth. Barlow leaned his whole warm weight against her leg. "It's ours," she whispered to him. "You hear me, old man? It was ours the whole time." She went back out to the main room. The storm had softened. Through a gap in the boards she could see the snow falling gentle now, the sky going gray toward morning. The stove had made the place almost warm. She found a tin of crackers still somehow good and a jar of preserves, ate for the first time since noon, and gave Barlow the last of the jerky from her pocket. Then she folded her coat into a pillow and lay down on the floor by the stove with her dog curled against her back. And for the first time in 3 months, Alina, Pruitt, felt something loosen in her chest that she'd thought would never loosen again. She had a roof. She had walls. She had a name that meant something after all. Let the town keep its cold shoulders. She was home and she was safe, and outside the world had gone quiet and white and still. Her eyes closed. Barlow sighed against her spine. The fire popped once and settled. Alina slept. She woke to Barlow growling low in his chest and the sound of a boot on the porch step. Then a fist hit the front door so hard the whole building shook, and a man's voice came through the wood, flat and hard and certain. "Whoever's in there, come out. This is Sheriff Cray, and you are trespassing on condemned property." Alina was on her feet before she was awake. Gray morning light came through the gaps in the boards. Barlow stood between her and the door with every hair on his back standing up, and the growl in him had gone to something she'd never heard before. "Open this door," the sheriff said, "or I open it for you." She opened it. There were 4 of them on the porch. A big man in a sheriff's coat, that was Cray. 2 younger men behind him with the look of hired muscle. And in front, small and straight and cold, the woman from the boarding house, Delia Vole. "You," Delia said, and her lip curled. "I told you the beds were full." "You told me a lie," Alina said. "Same as you told the sign in your window." The sheriff stepped forward. "Ma'am, this building's been condemned for 40 years. You broke a chain and a lock to get in, and that's breaking and entering. Now you'll gather your things and this animal and come with me." And here's where it changed. Here's where it stopped being about a cold night and a shut door and became something with teeth. Because Alina did not gather her things. She stood in the doorway of her father's trading post, 70 years old in her stocking feet, and she said, "This building belongs to Silas Mercer. It says so on the deed hanging in the back room under the state seal. Silas Mercer was my father. My name was Alina Mercer before it was anything else. So you tell me, Sheriff, how does a town condemn a man's property, chain it shut, and never once let a soul inside to read what's in it?" The porch went silent. The snow ticked against the boards, and Alina watched Delia Vole's face change, not to surprise. That was the thing that told Alina she was standing on top of something buried. Delia wasn't surprised. Delia was afraid. "She's confused," Delia said quickly to the sheriff. "She's an old woman, she's got no papers, she's making it up. Take her out of there." "There's a deed on the wall," Alina said, "and 6 strongboxes, and 40 years of ledgers with your family's name in every one of them. Ode, Mrs. Vole. Ode and ode and ode. Shall I read them out here on the porch, or would you rather I didn't?" Nobody moved, and Alina understood in that frozen second exactly what she was looking at. This wasn't 4 people come to remove a trespasser. This was a town that had a secret in a locked room and had just learned the room was open. If you're still with me, still standing on this cold porch with Alina and her dog, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because it costs you nothing and it tells me you want to know how this ends. Now, back to the porch. The sheriff, to his credit, hesitated. He was a big, honest kind of man, the kind that does what he's told and doesn't ask enough questions. But even he had heard something in the word ode. "Delia," he said slowly, "what's she talking about ledgers?" "Nothing," Delia snapped. "Family business, old business, it's got nothing to do with you." She turned on the hired men. "Get her out." The 2 men came up the steps, and Barlow moved. 13 years old with a bad hip, but he put himself in the doorway with his teeth bared and a sound coming out of him like a saw going through bone, and the 2 men stopped like they'd hit a wall. There's something about a dog that means it. Everybody on that porch knew Barlow meant it. "Call it off," one of the men said. "He's an old dog defending an old woman on her own property," Alina said. "You call yourselves off." That was when the second thing happened. Down the road, through the snow, came another figure. An old woman, older even than Alina, wrapped in a man's canvas coat, walking with a cane and moving faster than a cane should let her. She came up the path, planted herself at the bottom of the steps, and looked up at Delia Vole with 60 years of something burning in her eyes. "Ruth," Delia said, and the fear was naked now, "go home." "I heard the name Mercer," the old woman said. "All the way down the road I heard it. I've been waiting 40 years to hear somebody say that name out loud in this town." She turned to Alina. "Are you Silas's girl, the little one, Alina?" "I am," Alina said. The old woman's face broke and she started to cry right there in the snow. "They ran him out," Ruth said. "Your daddy. They ran him out of this town in the dark and told everybody he stole and skipped. And it was a lie. It was always a lie, and I have carried it in my mouth for 40 years. "Ruth, that is enough," Delia said, her voice climbing. But it was not enough. It was nowhere near enough, and Alina stepped down off the porch into the snow and she said, "Then come inside, all of you. Come inside and let's read what my father left behind. Because I think it's time this town heard its own accounts." They came inside, even Delia, because by then she had no choice, and because a small crowd had started to gather out on the road, drawn by the shouting, and there is nothing a woman like Delia Vole fears more than a crowd that starts to wonder. Alina lit the lamps. She brought out the ledgers and laid them on the counter, opened the strongboxes with the key from under the floor, and one by one took out what her father had hidden 40 years before. Now picture it. An old woman, a gray dog, a warm stove, and around the counter a ring of faces from a town that had shut every door. And Alina Mercer read them the truth. The first strongbox held the promissory notes. Signed, dated, legal. The Vole family, it turned out, had owed Silas Mercer more than anyone. Garrett Vole, Delia's grandfather, the man who'd owned the mill and thought he owned the town, had run it 3 straight bad years on credit from the trading post. Flour, tools, wages, all of it carried by Silas Mercer, all of it written down, all of it signed. The second strongbox held the letters. And the letters told the rest. Silas Mercer had come quietly to Garrett Vole and asked to be paid, not all at once, just something because his own suppliers were calling in what he owed them. And Garrett Vole, rather than pay a debt the whole town could see was real, had done what men like that always do. He'd made the man who was owed into the criminal. There was a letter in Garrett Vole's own hand to the sheriff of that time. It accused Silas Mercer of cheating his accounts, of stealing from the very families he'd been carrying. A lie built to bury a debt, and it worked. The town, ashamed of what it owed and glad of a reason not to pay, turned on the man who'd fed it. They came one night. Alina remembered it now in flashes, the shouting, the lamp swinging, her father's hand grabbing hers. They ran him out, and Garrett Vole took the key, chained the door, and told everyone the place was cursed with a thief's bad luck, because a chained door doesn't get opened, and an unopened door keeps its ledgers shut. For 40 years the Voles had run Cedar Hollow on the memory of a lie, and the lie only held as long as nobody read the books. "My father didn't steal from you," Alina said, and her voice filled that whole cold room. "My father was robbed by you, and then he was blamed for it so you'd never have to pay. Every one of you." She looked around the ring of faces, and some of them couldn't meet her eyes because some were old enough to remember and had always half known. "You didn't leave this place standing out of respect. You left it standing because you were afraid of exactly this. This counter, these books, this morning." She turned to Delia Vole last. "Your family owed my father his living, and when he asked for it, you took his name instead. You're still doing it. You slammed a door in a Mercer's face not 2 days ago and didn't even know it was mine to slam." Delia Vole had no words. For the first time, that hard little face had nothing behind it at all. And then the sheriff, Cray, the big, honest, slow man, took off his hat. He held it in both hands and looked down at the ledger open on the counter, at his own family's name in it. Cray owed, and he said, so quiet everyone leaned in to hear. "My grandmother always said we owed the Mercer store, right up till she died. Said it was a debt of honor and the town swept it under. I thought she was going soft in the head." He looked up at Alina with wet eyes. She wasn't going soft. She was the only one telling the truth. The room broke open then. You know how it is when a thing everyone has agreed not to see is finally set down in the middle of the floor. The old one started to talk. Ruth was crying and laughing at once. Names came out. Stories. A woman said her father had cursed the Voles on his deathbed and never said why. A man said his family had left Cedar Hollow for a decade out of shame and never knew the reason until now. And Delia Vole walked out into the snow alone, and nobody followed her and nobody stopped her either. The deed held. That's the plain fact of it. A lawyer came up from the county seat 2 weeks later, a young woman with cold hands and a warm way with old documents, and she looked at the deed and the notes and the unbroken chain of 40 years and told Alina what Alina already knew. It was hers. Land, building, and everything in it. It had always been hers from the moment Silas Mercer died, waiting in a locked room for someone with his blood to come and open the door. And by keeping the place sealed, the town had sat on the property of his only heir for 4 decades. There were words for that. Legal words, expensive words, and the young lawyer said some of them out loud with a small, hard smile. Alina could have taken Cedar Hollow apart. The old debts, with 40 years of interest, ran to more than the town could pay without selling itself off house by house. She held every note. She held the mill near enough, because the Vole fortune had been built on money that was never theirs. A harder woman could have finished what that porch confrontation started and left Cedar Hollow a ghost town with her name on the gate. Alina thought about it. I won't pretend she didn't. She'd been turned out into the snow at 70 with a dog and a suitcase, and there's a part of every one of us that would have wanted them to pay for that, every last cent with interest. But here's what she did instead. She had the young lawyer draw up papers forgiving the old debts. All of them. Vole included, though the Voles had to sign a paper first, a plain public paper, admitting in writing what Garrett Vole had done to Silas Mercer, so the truth would be on record in the county seat where no chained door could ever bury it again. That was the price, not money. The truth, written down, the way her father had written everything down. Delia signed it. She had nothing left to trade but her family's good name, and she found out that morning exactly what it had always been worth. Then Alina opened the trading post. She swept 40 years of dust out the front door with Barlow supervising from the porch. She washed the windows the boards had covered, took down the X of gray timber and burned it in the stove. Her father's stock was mostly ruined by time, but his shelves were good, his counter was good, and the big iron register still rang when she pressed the keys. Ruth came every day. So did Cray, off duty, with his sleeves rolled up. So did others, a few at first and then more, the ones who wanted to be part of setting a thing right even if they'd been too young or too scared to stop it going wrong. They wouldn't take pay. A town can carry a shame for 40 years, and it turns out it will work awfully hard for the chance to put it down. By spring, the Mercer Trading Post was open again, the first store at that end of Cedar Hollow in Alina's whole long life. She kept the ledgers the way her father had, names down the left in a careful hand, and when hard families came in short she carried them because that was the trade her father had really run, the one the town had forgotten on purpose. She wrote it all down. Owed. And she never once used the word as a weapon. She hung the deed back on the wall where it had always been, under new glass. And on the floor by the counter, she left the carved board exactly where it was. Silas Mercer. She oiled it so the letters would last. People asked her about it and she told them the whole story every time, because a thing spoken out loud in the daylight can never be chained in the dark again. Barlow lived to see the first summer. He'd lie on the warm boards by the door in a patch of sun, gray and slow and content, and greet every soul who came in like they were the best thing he'd ever seen. He died in his sleep in August, on those same boards in the warm, and Alina buried him out back under a good tree and cried the way she hadn't let herself cry for Harold, or for her father, or for the 8-year-old girl carried out of town in the dark. She cried for all of them at once, and then she wiped her face and went back inside and opened the store because that's what you do. She was not turned away again, not ever. The town that had shut every door learned her name, the real one, and said it with something close to shame and something close to love. Eleanor Mercer, Silas's girl, the one who came back. On cold nights, when the wind came down off the mountains and rattled the good clean windows, Eleanor would sit by the stove with a cup of tea and think about the first night. The slammed door, the bolt sliding home, the long white walk to the edge of a town that didn't want her. She'd been so sure that night that she'd reached the end of everything. And she would look up at the front door of her father's store, the door she'd broken a chain to open, standing now unlocked and unafraid, warm light spilling out of it onto the snow. Funny thing, a door. It can shut a person out in the cold, or it can open at the right hand at the right hour and let them all the way home. Eleanor Mercer finished her tea. She banked the fire. And she left the light on over the door, the way her father used to, for anyone still out walking in the dark with nowhere else to go.